Behind every headline is a room no one wants to enter. A room lined with photographs, boxed evidence, and stories that stain. Welcome to True Crime Obsession, where we walk the corridor between fact and fear. Lock the doors, kill the lights, and let's open today's file. July 30th, 2008. A Greyhound bus traveling through the vast empty plains of Manitoba carried dozens of weary passengers on their way across Canada. Among them was 22-year-old carnival worker Tim McLean, a free spirit, smiling and full of life, asleep in his seat as the night dragged on. But what began as an ordinary trip would soon spiral into one of the most horrifying and incomprehensible crimes in modern Canadian history. Tim McLean was just 22 years old, charismatic, adventurous, and always smiling. His friends called him a drifter in the best sense, someone who loved freedom, laughter, and travel. On this summer night, he had boarded Greyhound bus 1170 from Edmonton to Winnipeg, exhausted from work, and quietly drifted to sleep against the window near the back of the bus. He sat in the row in front of the toilet. Seated just behind him was a stranger, one who was picked up at the Erickson, Manitoba stop. A tall, 40-year-old man named Vincent Li. He wore sunglasses and had a shaved head. He was a quiet, reserved immigrant from China, described by coworkers as polite and soft-spoken. But beneath the silence, something was brewing. Li was suffering from untreated schizophrenia, haunted by terrifying voices that seemed to command his every move. He first sat near the front of the bus, but moved seats during the ride and sat beside McLean. McLean barely acknowledged Li before falling back asleep against the window. Then, it happened, without warning. Li produced a large hunting knife. He turned toward Tim McLean, who was still asleep, defenseless. Passengers recall hearing blood-curdling screams as the blade slashed again and again. The confined space of the bus became a chamber of terror as riders scrambled to escape. The bus stopped and passengers fled. Once everyone was off the bus, the driver and two other men attempted to help McLean, but were chased off the bus by the knife-wielding Li. The driver would lock Li inside. What followed is almost unspeakable. Witnesses watched through the windows in horror as Vincent Li continued his attack on McLean, stabbing, mutilating, decapitating, and even cutting off pieces of flesh and eating them in full view of the people outside. It was an act of madness, unlike anything the nation had ever seen. The suspect is armed with large knife. The victim is deceased. Suspect refusing to exit bus. Hostage situation declared, said one police officer. Before police arrived, Li was seen attempting to drive away on the bus. The bus driver was cautioned enough that before they got off, they engaged the emergency immobilizer. Around 8:30 p.m., police arrived to find the suspect still on the bus. Being prevented from escaping by another passenger, the bus driver, and a truck driver, who had provided a crowbar and a hammer as weapons. The other passengers were huddled at the roadside, some of them crying and vomiting. By 9 p.m., the police were at a standoff with Li. A negotiator and a heavily armed tactical team were called to the scene. For hours, officers stood outside, their weapons trained on the windows. Inside, Li paced, clutching the knife, and displaying what he had done. At one point, he held Tim's severed head in the window, as horrified witnesses screamed. Around 1:30, after an agonizing standoff, Vincent Li attempted to flee through a broken bus window, but officers subdued him. Inside the bus, investigators found a scene of carnage almost too disturbing to describe. There were parts of the victim found all over the bus. Most were retrieved and placed in plastic bags. However, part of the heart and eyes were never found. It was assumed that Li ate them. In 2009, the case went before a Canadian courtroom. the nation demanded answers. Why had this man, seemingly quiet, harmless, committed such a monstrous act? I heard voices telling me that Mr. McLean was a threat, that he was an alien, and that I had to protect myself. Vincent Li, court testimony. Medical experts testified that Li was in the grips of severe untreated schizophrenia. He believed he was obeying divine command. His attack, they argued, was not driven by malice, but madness. One witness stated, "He just stood there, calm, like he wasn't even in his own body. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen." Passengers were haunted by what they witnessed. Some would never step onto a bus again. On 21st December 2008, 5 months after McLean's death, his girlfriend Colleen Yestrow gave birth to a son. Let's rewind for a second and get more information on Li and the days leading up to the brutal attack. Li was born in China, and while he had a rough start, being that he was premature and had some developmental delays in the beginning of his life, Li would grow to improve as he entered high school. He received a bachelor's degree in automotive engineering in 1992. He married in 1995 and immigrated to Canada in 2001 as part of the Federal Skilled Worker Program. He became a citizen of Canada in 2006. Sometime after that, Li would convert to Christianity and be baptized after he said he heard the voice of God. Li would say that the voice would regularly order him to travel through the country on foot or by bus, often disappearing from his home for days on end, his wife stated. Due to his paranoid delusions and fear of an alien invasion, Li would begin carrying a large hunting knife with him for protection. At 12:05 p.m., on 28th of July in Edmonton, Li boarded a Greyhound bus bound for Winnipeg. On 29th July, around 6 p.m., Li got off the bus in Erickson, Manitoba, with at least 3 pieces of luggage, and stayed the night on a bench next to a grocery store. According to one witness, he was seen at 3 a.m. sitting bolt upright, with eyes wide open. On the morning of 30th of July, still at the bench, he sold his new laptop computer to a 15-year-old boy for $60. In March of 2009, the verdict shocked and divided the nation. Vincent Li was found not criminally responsible for the death of Tim McLean due to mental illness. Instead of prison, he was committed indefinitely to a psychiatric institution. The public outcry was immediate. Many could not accept that a man who committed such horror would escape prison. Families of victims demanded harsher laws, but in Canada, the ruling meant that Li would remain confined, not as punishment, but as treatment. Over the years, doctors reported Li responded to medication and treatment. By 2015, he was granted supervised release. Later, he was given full freedom, under the new name Will Baker. Today, he walks among the public, free. Tim McLean's life was stolen in the most brutal way imaginable, his final moments etched into the nightmares of all who were there that night. Vincent Li's story forces us to ask, was justice truly served? Or was society left unprotected from a man who committed an act beyond comprehension? What do you think? Should Vincent Li have spent his life behind bars for what he did? Or was the court right to see him as a victim of his own mind? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. That's case closed? Well, at least on paper. Let us know your thoughts about this story. Was the punishment fitting for the crime committed, or should it have been more severe? If you have a story suggestion, leave it below in the comments. Before you go, don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who is obsessed with true crime like we are. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story. Until then, stay obsessed.